This is Psych Overflow, coming to you from the University of Southern California's Psychology Department.
We are your go-to podcast for all things psychology.
Welcome, and let's dive in.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. My name is Natalie. I am a second year in the BCS program. And Armin, I'll go ahead and let you introduce yourself as well.
Okay, yeah. Hi, I'm Armin. I'm also a second year in BCS, and we're joined with two professors here, Dr. Huey and Dr. Saxby. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves as well?
Sure. I'm Stan Huey. I am indeed a professor here at USC in the psychology department, and I have a joint affiliation with American Studies and Ethnicity, and I'm also the director of graduate studies. I did a stint a while ago for quite a while as director of graduate studies, and I've taken on the role again this current academic year.
All right. And I'm Darby Saxby. I'm a professor in the clinical area. I'm currently the director of clinical training.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for being here and wanting to talk to us about just kind of DEI and the state of DEI, I guess, here in academia, now that we're seeing a lot of the rollbacks and whatnot. I guess to kind of start us off, maybe for some people who don't know what DEI is and, might need that defined a little bit, could you start us off by defining what DEI is and then tell us its significance within academia?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. So, DEI it's obviously initials. The initials stand for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Things that we all think are really good, especially if we're psychologists who study humans. In my mind, diversity is part of representativeness. If you want to be a good researcher, if you want to be a good clinician, you have to think about how your science can speak to a representative population of people who are different from each other. And equity and inclusion are about removing some of the barriers that have historically prevented certain groups from being part of academia and part of our research, and finding ways to include them more proactively in what we do. So that's my working definition. Stan, I don't know if you have a different framework.
No, I think that's a great definition. Maybe I want to add that a number of us do work dealing with disparities and do work that focus specifically on underrepresented populations or those who maybe have historically had less access to certain resources. So some definitions of and ways of thinking about DEI also have to focus on kind of doing work that tries to be attentive to and to mitigate certain disparities that are out there. But I think therein lies some of the controversy about it. There are different ideas, notions, perspectives that folks have on it that I think it's important to acknowledge. Folks like Darby and I obviously disagree with some of the attacks on DEI, but I think it is important to acknowledge that there are clearly other perspectives that folks have that don't align with ours.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because just to kind of add on to that, Stan, I think for me, now that I'm educating myself more about it, something I was kind of surprised to learn, I guess, was that it also kind of covers accessibility to things. So it's not just about like inclusion of like minorities, I guess, in terms of like representativeness, but also like having, like tampons in a washroom is considered DEI, or having like ramps for people, who can't go upstairs is also part of DEI. I guess before we get into the questions, are there certain like DEI things in academia that are kind of being under attack in this setting as well, that's not directly related to just research and things of that nature?
I think it's a tough question because I sort of feel like it's all under attack. And one thing that makes this conversation hard is that the administration, despite all these executive orders basically saying that, universities can't practice DEI, has not actually defined DEI, so we don't really have an operational definition of what they mean. And so we're sort of like working blind in a way because we know there's something we're not supposed to do, but we don't know what it is. And it seems like it's things that we generally think are good and important for our discipline. So that doesn't really answer your question, but it's just where my mind goes when it comes to thinking about sort of different ramifications of DEI.
I agree completely with Darby on that. And I think there's obviously the Trump administration is, I think, intentionally kind of politicized this and kind of created this maybe bogeyman understanding of DEI that's in ways to kind of give his agenda a lot of sort of problematic traction, so to speak. So part of the problem is that DEI has become this kind of bogeyman, and it's hard to give objective, rational counter arguments when really what's they're going for is this kind of emotional thing to kind of latch on to as a basis for this, I would say, very problematic sort of policy agenda that's out there. So you're right, like tampons in bathrooms, wheelchair access. These things are part of this larger DEI initiative, but those sorts of arguments can't sort of break through kind of the way that this is sort of being framed in the larger kind of political sort of context. So great point, and I wish it had more resonance, but it doesn't, because that's not the goal.
Yeah, I mean, we'd love to, I guess, hear y'all thoughts about the DEI rollbacks, like how they're kind of manifesting in academia. Like, what does that look like? The tangible effects that you've kind of seen so far. How do these rollbacks impact the academic landscape, research landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really multifaceted. And I think one of the tactics of the Trump administration is sort of like a shock and awe of just like issuing a ton of different executive orders that all have really destructive ramifications and then making us panic and not even being able to focus on one thing at a time. So a couple things that I'll mention are sort of policing grants and canceling research grants if they have kind of banned keywords. So it looks like they're using kind of almost like just word detection AI to see whether people are talking about, underrepresented groups or diversity, and then those projects are getting canceled or they're not letting them get reviewed or funded in the first place. That's one really big basket. I think another really big basket is around them threatening universities with cancellation of federal funds if universities don't sign an attestation that they aren't practicing DEI or offering DEI programming. That's put, I think, a lot of places in a bind because we need federal funds in part to serve students through programs like Pell Grants and student aid. So, that's another but very closely related basket. There's also clamping down on campuses where there have been student protests. So, canceling funding to Columbia, for example, because of the Gaza protest. I see that as related to the attack on DEI, even though it's a little bit different. So it feels like a dizzying array of attacks, and the goal is clearly not about improving the quality of education or better serving students. It's about terrorizing academics and destroying universities, and I think they're just sort of looking for any convenient cudgel with which to do so.
And sort of piggybacking on what Darby said, I think there's been this sort of chilling effect too when it comes to instruction, kind of the outward facing face of kind of departments and diversity efforts. So I think more scholars are more careful in a problematic way about what they include in their syllabi, what the content of their teaching, in part because of the call basically from the administration to report folks who might be talking about ways that are kind of problematic to the administration. So that's one concern. Websites being scrubbed of, DEI content. So students are less able to see and kind of know more about kind of the efforts that departments, that universities are making on this front, if they're still making them at all. And my biggest concern is about the next generation of students and scholars, and the culture fear, the concerns about federal funding, about whether, research, a research career more broadly is for them, and particularly a research career dealing with the study of women, the study of diverse populations, whether it's even viable for them to pursue careers of that sort. And again, I think this is partly the purpose, the function of kind of what's going on. And I think it's unfortunate
Yeah,
and
I'm
scary.
anecdotally hearing from people who are writing grants and saying, oh, I need to make sure that I don't include any of these words that might, get my project pulled. And so you start to self-censor, even before being compelled to do so. And I think over time that shapes people's programs of research, what they think they should study, what they want their careers to look like. So it does have a very chilling effect that goes beyond even, I think, what the EO's immediate effects have been. I mean, I try to be optimistic, so I think this administration will be gone in a few years. But for people that are training now, this is going to affect trajectories, for decades to come, and not just in terms of what people are studying, but also some of the grants that are being canceled are training awards, like diversity supplements or the diversity F31s, like really valuable programs that support our most talented students. And if students don't have those mechanisms to fund them, we also get some brain drain, I think, out of our trainee workforce.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that's kind of like the conversations that I've been having with, people as a second year in my cohort and whatnot, and people around me that were like, well, what is this going to look like for us in a few years? It's already weird now, but what is this going to look like for us? Do I pivot? Do I continue to do these amazing things that I want to do that are really inspirational to me and help other people? Or do I, again, pivot to something else? Definitely been seeing those like on Reddit, like people sharing words, because it seems like, your grants are going through AI, like, feeds or whatever to feed out whoever is doing that type of work. And so people are like sharing all of these tips to like help, you know, get your grant seen and hopefully funded. But yeah, it's strange that it's like a censorship for sure.
Yeah, you might not know this, but the word list was actually initially gotten by within our department from Morteza.
No kidding.
Got it from a program officer at NSF, and then I shared it on Blue Sky and Twitter, which is how it ended up sort of going viral.
Wow.
You can thank USC for releasing all those words. I don't know if that's a good thing, but I guess it helps researchers at least prepare in the short term.
Yeah, that's a great little anecdote. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess on that note, I've been really proud of our department, just how vocal that all of our faculty has been. I know other people in other departments, their faculty hasn't been as vocal about all of the things that are going on. And yeah, it's just really nice to, I guess, to be a part of the department. Quick shout out for our department. That we're a bunch of great people here that are really like, I don't know, sounding the horn and feeling, getting out there as much as we can, I guess, to make things better, I guess, as much as we can. But yeah, I guess, what's one piece of advice that you'd give to an early career scholar that's kind of navigating this right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think these are uncertain times, but my encouragement to early career folks is, if anything, your programs of research will be more needed, not less needed in the future. So I do strongly believe that the pendulum swings in politics and in culture. And we're in this period of like a very authoritarian pendulum swing that I would like to think is going to be met with, greater appreciation of these core values of diversity that hopefully will make people more aware of the need to, expand our research and think more broadly. Like the fact is, like, a lot of this in my mind is like a last gasp against demographic trends that are inevitable. Like our country is changing. Um, European whites are the minority in California and will soon be nationally. I think there's a lot of desire to pretend that that's not happening and push back against it, but it's already happening. So I feel like this administration is trying to do a lot of retrogressive stuff to bring us back to a time that we've already moved beyond any sort of ability to get to. And so, if anything, I think we're going to move towards a more pluralistic and liberal society, whether they like it or not. But that's if we don't get replaced by AI first and, locked in foreign gulags.
I'm also semi-optimistic, but sort of piggybacking on something Darby said, there's a reason I'm somewhat pessimistic too, and this is based on my understanding of some of the social psychology literature. And I think the more there's an awareness and a communication among Euro Americans that they're becoming part of the minority, the more there's going to be a movement in the direction of Trumpism and this sort of identity in opposition to things like DEI. So I think the diversification, you might say, of America in some ways may continue to create these big pendulum swings where you will see more of this really problematic kind of political movement in the direction of, I wouldn't even call it conservatism anymore. I think we need to be prepared for some wild swings in the future, but we also need to make sure that we're vocal. And because authoritarian regimes, I think, thrive on kind of this sort of threat factor and folks cowering and capitulating and accommodating. I don't think that should be, I don't think kind of hiding our heads in the sand and hoping that this passes is the way to go. I think resistance in whatever forms are feasible for us is the way to go.
Yeah, and I think that's right that there is this resurgence of, I agree, not really conservatism, but I think you call it like a white nationalism or maybe just like a white identity politics. That there's this sense of aggrievement that seems to be like the engine that's fueling a lot of these retrogressive shifts. And what's alarming is I think you see it not just in the US, you see it all over Europe, right? You see very xenophobic, like racist, anti-immigration sentiment. You see people like Marie Le Pen or some of the political parties in Sweden who are using this kind of populist, racially tinged rhetoric. So I think it's a huge force that we can't ignore and pretend that it's going away. But I also think there is strength in numbers, and it's a minority group movement that I think personally is doomed to fail. If, as Stan says, we are organized and not defeated. And so, like you asked about advice to students and early career people, I think the other thing is to recognize that making people discouraged and hopeless is a tactic. And if we are united, again, there are more of us than there are of them, but we have to try, because otherwise they win because we're all too defeated and checked out.
Yeah, I agree. At the same time, so again, I'm a big fan of resisting and resistance. I'm also a big fan of trying to find the common values and places where we agree, because what we don't want is a civil war, right? And there's lots of kind of middle ground, lots of places where we agree, but I think that because of the rhetoric, because of different ideologies, and because when we're attacked, we feel that we need to counterattack, we kind of tend to gloss over or not see those areas where there is sort of common ground. So I think both things need to happen. We can't cower. We can't hide our heads in the sand. We need to resist. But we also need to think about, well, how do we create a larger rhetoric or politics that resonates with a lot of those folks who are voting for this sort of authoritarian regime, but they really have values that correspond with the ones that we hold as well. So I think both things need to happen. And I think it's difficult when you're feeling attacked to do that, but I think that's vital.
Yeah, we have to be smart. We have to be strategic. We have to actually win elections. We have to combat misinformation. And I do think Stan's right. Like, ordinary Americans don't want to see ICE handcuffing a mom in front of her 3 kids, right? Like, there is, I think, horror and starting to be pushback about some of the really egregious abuses. Putting a Fulbright student in jail because she signed her name to an op-ed. I think that is not consistent with what we would consider to be American values. I think we have to call that out. We can't just like get mad and stomp our feet. We have to be organized and thoughtful, I think, about how we push back. But we can't just decide that, they're too powerful for us to resist.
And it turns out that ordinary Americans also endorse diversity. They like the idea of equity, and they are not at all opposed to inclusion, right? So part of it may be on our side doing a better job of talking about kind of what those things mean in a way that resonates better with the larger swath of the population, not just folks in kind of liberal enclaves, not just folks in universities, but folks outside of our walls. These values are not unique to us. We share them with others. We just need to do a better job of articulating, I think, them in a way that kind of resonates with other folks.
Yeah, well said. I completely agree. It does seem like there's like an air of just misinformation and I guess perhaps like lack of education on certain topics, like especially when the administration seems very gung-ho to key in on things that they know are gonna like produce very visceral kind of knee-jerk reactions, like transgenic mice are not transgender mice. But so actually that's kind of like a good segue because I know Darby, you've actually been quite outspoken on this topic. That's how I actually found you on Twitter, which you alluded to earlier, which ballsy platform, I guess, to have these conversations on. Yeah, Stan, I'm sure you've also been talking to colleagues, but I know Darby, you've been kind of like, at least via social
Darby
media.
is a great public intellectual. So,
Yeah.
when I grow up, I think I want to be a Darby.
Oh, you're too kind.
But yeah, so I just wanted to ask both of you and maybe Darby, you can give your input with your conversations on Twitter. How has that gone, and have you learned anything from just like those conversations, and seeing how people react to certain things, and does it give you hope, I guess, that like having conversations you can kind of like educate people more on the topic?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it depends a little on the platform. I feel like Twitter's where I go to fight, and then Blue Sky is where I go to like find my people. I think a lot of academic Twitter, science Twitter has migrated over to Blue Sky, and it's generally, I think, like a more like-minded platform. I think Twitter has a lot of people on it that, are sort of on our side, but has been so sort of corrupted by the algorithms, and they're just all these kind of trolls. And some of them are probably bots, and some of them are probably just like looking for engagement. So, when I get into like rabbit hole fights in Twitter, I think it's more about just like me venting as a very bad coping strategy because I'm just like, oh. But I started writing on Substack, which I feel like has actually been really fun because there's longer form. It's a platform for people to write longer pieces. And so I think you can get more thoughtful and you can get more engagement. And that's been encouraging. And I just actually posted a piece this morning about why immigration is good for birth rates. Because there's all this pronatal kind of like baby boom conversation coming out of the Trump White House right now. But they're ignoring the fact that immigration is actually the best promoter of higher birth rates. And I already have all these people coming out of the woodwork to yell at me about this. So I like arguing. So I think that makes me relish some of these confrontations, but as to whether or not they make me feel hopeful, that's a tricky question. I think it really varies depending on the conversation.
What I do now is, when I give talks, usually to academic audiences, but often to clinical and sometimes lay audiences, that I've become more outspoken, in terms of my views, my perspective. And I think that's the kind of the primary forum that I use. And often I'll kind of start, my talks with sort of talking about the current political context, and, it just really talking about my own family history of having grandparents on both sides who moved from, rural Louisiana and rural Mississippi, in large part because they had very few rights as Black folk, in the early part of the 20th century, and couldn't vote, that sort of thing. And one of the things that was socialized in me early on was, if I do nothing else with my life, every election cycle, I need to go to the polls and exercise that constitutional right that I have and that my forebears fought for and migrated for. So I do that, and I encourage other folks to. I don't know what's the counter say now in terms of how many days until the midterm elections. I don't know. I check the midterm counter every once in a while, but so whenever I give the talk, I kind of let folks know how many days remain until the next midterms. I'm not telling you how to vote, but if you are able, and that is something you have a right to do, then exercise it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. Kind of brings me, I guess, to my final question here. So many of us want to continue doing this type of work, what does meaningful, sustainable DEI look like to you all moving forward? What are some examples of like finding creative solutions to keep it going?
That's a good, hard question. Because I think it's we're in a rapidly moving sort of situation politically. But I mean, I keep coming back to this idea of just building community, speaking out, being, as Stan said, values driven, looking for unifying values across, different political groups that we all have some common values and purpose, using that to call people in. But I think we only ever fight authoritarianism through collective action. So I think the inclusion in DEI, the word inclusion, is about how we create community. And I think that's the only thing that's going to get us through the next few years.
And I think a lot of DEI work isn't, I would say, isn't that creative. It's really kind of mundane. Who's on the hiring committee? Who's on the admissions committees? And you might be surprised at how critically important something as mundane is. Who's in the room when those sorts of decisions are made, how important that is in terms of maintaining those efforts. I'm bemoan and kind of bothered by kind of, scrubbing of stuff on websites, and all the authoritarian, executive orders and semi mandates coming from on high. And I don't think I think our university is in a really tough situation. I do wish that in some ways there was kind of more assertiveness at kind of at the higher levels. But at the ground level, in terms of the stuff that we do here in our department, we have a lot of autonomy. I have no I have no intention of scaling back on my sort of efforts in my role as DGS and in my role as a mentor in my academic work. I don't plan to change the way I do things. If I'm involved in admissions, if I'm on a hiring committee, and I've been on several over the past few years, my efforts, that's not going to change. And my guess is that Darby's efforts aren't going to change either. So,
Yeah, exactly. I think we keep doing what we do and we keep sticking to the values that we care about. And I feel the exact same way as DCT, to whatever extent I can play a role in our admissions to our clinical program, right? Like wanting to be sure we're training representative groups of clinical scientists because that's the only way we're going to solve mental health, right? We have to be mindful of this stuff. Whatever dictates are coming from administration about what words we can use, we can still have our values. I was really heartened that Harvard is pushing back, at least in some ways, against administrative demands. I'd like to see more universities do that. I think universities have sort of been trying to strike their own deals, but I'd love USC to join forces with some of the other places. I think we're in a tricky place right now because our president is retiring and we don't have a dean at Dornsife. We have an interim dean. So we're in a bit of a leadership vacuum, but I'm hopeful that whoever we pick as our next president and dean will share some of these values and be able to continue some of this work.
Yeah, well, thank you both for taking the time to talk to us today a little bit more about this. Yeah, really appreciate you both.
thanks for the invite.
Yeah, thanks for facilitating this conversation.
This is Psych Overflow signing off. Thank you for listening.
Be sure to subscribe to our podcast for future episodes, and don't hesitate to reach out to us with your feedback, questions, or topic suggestions.
See you next time.